The gunfire echoed across the plains as Sophia Allen lay bleeding beside the overturned stagecoach, her fellow passengers scattered dead around her. The setting sun painted the Montana Territory sky crimson, almost as crimson as the blood soaking through her petticoats. She knew she would die here, miles from anywhere, until the silhouette of a lone rider appeared on the horizon, dust billowing behind him as he approached at full gallop. It was 1876, and Sophia had come west to start anew after losing everything in Philadelphia, her father to consumption, her mother to grief shortly after, and their family fortune to her father's unscrupulous business partner. At 22, she'd sold what remained of their belongings to purchase a ticket west, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher position in the growing town of Willow Creek. The stagecoach had been less than a day's journey from her destination when the bandits struck. They'd appeared from nowhere, 6 men with bandanas covering their faces, guns blazing. The driver had fallen first, then the shotgun messenger. Inside, panic erupted as passengers scrambled. A banker from St. Louis, a young married couple, an elderly gentleman returning to his ranch, and Sophia. She'd been shot trying to escape a bullet tearing through her thigh, another grazing her side. The pain was excruciating, but she'd managed to crawl behind a large boulder as the bandits ransacked the coach. They'd been too occupied with their plunder to notice her, and when they finally rode away, whooping and hollering, she was left alone with the dead. The rider approached cautiously, rifle at the ready, scanning the carnage. He dismounted several yards away, approaching on foot. "Hello?" he called out. "Anybody alive out here?" Sophia tried to call back, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. Still, somehow, he heard her. He turned toward the boulder, and she saw him clearly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with a dust-covered black hat and a revolver holstered at his hip. "Good Lord," he breathed when he spotted her. "Miss, can you hear me?" "Yes," Sophia managed, each breath sending waves of agony through her body. The man knelt beside her, his blue eyes assessing her injuries with practiced efficiency. "I'm Hank Morgan," he said, his voice gentle despite its roughness. "I ranch about 5 miles west of here." "Sophia Allen," she whispered. "Please, help me." "I'm going too, Miss Allen. You're hurt bad, but I've seen worse." His large, calloused hands moved swiftly as he tore a strip from his own shirt and wrapped it tightly around her thigh. "This'll slow the bleeding until I can get you proper help." When he'd done what he could for her wounds, Hank stood. "We need to get you to a doctor. Think you can stand?" Sophia tried to push herself up, but her legs crumpled beneath her, sending fresh pain coursing through her body. A sob escaped her lips. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I can't. I'm too weak to stand." Hank's expression softened, determination settling in the lines of his weathered face. "Then I'll be your legs till you can walk again," he said simply, as if making the most natural declaration in the world. Without another word, he gathered her into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. Sophia bit her lip to keep from crying out as he carried her to his horse. "This is Rusty," Hank said, gesturing to the large chestnut stallion. "He's strong enough for both of us." With remarkable gentleness for such a large man, he settled her in the saddle, then mounted behind her, one arm securing her against his chest. "I've got you, Miss Allen," he murmured near her ear. "Just lean back. We'll be at my place before nightfall." As they rode, Sophia drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her and the solid warmth of the man behind her. Occasionally, his voice would pull her back to reality, asking if she was still with him, telling her to hold on just a little longer. When they arrived at Hank's ranch, night had fallen. Through pain-blurred eyes, Sophia made out a modest cabin with a barn and corral nearby. A dog barked, racing to meet them. "Quiet, Blue," Hank commanded, and the dog immediately fell silent, though it continued to circle anxiously. Hank dismounted first, then carefully lifted Sophia down. "Almost there," he told her, carrying her to the cabin door, which he nudged open with his foot. Inside was simple but clean a table with 4 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and a bed in the corner. Hank laid her gently on the bed. "I need to get those bullets out," he said, lighting a lamp. "I've done it before for men on cattle drives. Not as good as a real doctor, but Willow Creek's too far and you can't wait." Sophia nodded, fear and pain making her voice tremble. "Do what you must." Hank moved with efficiency, boiling water, gathering clean cloths, and retrieving a leather pouch that contained various instruments. He poured whiskey into a cup and handed it to her. "Drink this," he instructed. "All of it." Sophia did as she was told, coughing as the liquor burned its way down her throat. It warmed her almost immediately, dulling the edges of her pain. "I'm going to have to cut away your dress," Hank said, not meeting her eyes. "I'll be respectful, but—" "Do it," Sophia interrupted. Modesty seemed a trivial concern when her life hung in the balance. Hank worked methodically, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric to expose her wounds. The bullet in her thigh had gone straight through, leaving an entry and exit wound. The one along her side was a deep graze that had taken a chunk of flesh but hadn't penetrated deeply. "You're fortunate," he said. "No bones hit and the bleeding slowed. Still need to clean and stitch you up, though." The next hour was a blur of pain for Sophia, despite the whiskey. Hank's hands remained steady as he cleaned her wounds, removing bits of fabric and dirt, then stitching the torn flesh with neat, even sutures. Throughout it all, he spoke to her in a low, calm voice, telling her about his ranch, his cattle, anything to keep her mind occupied. By the time he finished, Sophia was drenched in sweat, tears streaming down her face, but the worst of the pain had passed into a dull, throbbing ache. Hank helped her drink water, then mixed some powder into it. "Laudanum," he explained. "For the pain, not too much, just enough to help you sleep." After she drank it, he covered her with a clean blanket. "Rest now," he said. "I'll be right here if you need anything." "Where will you sleep?" Sophia asked, already feeling the drug's effects pulling at her consciousness. "Don't you worry about that," Hank replied. "I've slept in worse places than my own floor." As Sophia drifted into darkness, she felt the gentle pressure of his hand smoothing her hair back from her forehead. It was the kindest touch she'd felt in a very long time. The next few days passed in a haze of fever and pain. Hank was constantly at her side, changing bandages, coaxing broth and water past her lips, cooling her brow with damp cloths when the fever burned hottest. She learned, in moments of lucidity, that he'd buried the stage passengers and sent word to the authorities in Willow Creek about the attack. On the fourth day, Sophia woke feeling clearer than she had since the attack. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window, and she could hear the low murmur of Hank's voice outside. Carefully, she pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing at the pull of stitches in her side. The cabin door opened, and Hank entered, stopping short when he saw her awake and sitting up. "Well now," he said, a smile breaking across his face. "Look who's decided to join the living again." "How long have I been here?" Sophia asked, her voice rough from disuse. 4 days, Hank replied, crossing to pour her a cup of water from a pitcher on the table. "Your fever broke last night. I was beginning to worry." He handed her the water, and she drank gratefully. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished, "for everything. You saved my life." Hank shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Sophia said firmly, "not anyone. You didn't just save me. You've cared for me, fed me, nursed me. I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything, Miss Allen," Hank said, taking the empty cup from her. "I'm just glad you're going to be all right." Over the next few days, Sophia continued to improve. Though she still couldn't stand or walk without assistance, she was able to sit up for longer periods and even helped Hank prepare simple meals. They fell into a routine of sorts. Hank would tend to his ranch work in the morning, then return to check on her around midday. In the evenings, they would share supper, and he would tell her stories of his life in the West. She learned that he'd come to Montana 10 years earlier, after serving in the Union Army during the Civil War. He had worked as a cowhand on several ranches before saving enough to buy his own small spread. He had 50 head of cattle, 2 horses Rusty, and a mare called Penny and Blue. the cattle dog who'd taken to sleeping at the foot of Sophia's bed. "What about family?" Sophia asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Hank in his rocking chair, Sophia propped up in bed with pillows. A shadow crossed Hank's face. "Lost my pa to the war. He fought for the Union, same as me. Ma passed while I was away fighting. Had a brother, younger by 2 years, Thomas. He came west with me, but we lost him to pneumonia that first winter." He stared into the flames. "Been on my own since." "I'm sorry," Sophia said softly. "I know what it's like to lose everyone." Hank nodded, and she could see he understood in a way few others could. "What about you?" he asked. "You were heading to Willow Creek?" Sophia told him about her parents, about losing their home in Philadelphia, about the teaching position waiting for her in Willow Creek. "If it still is waiting," she added with a sigh. "I was supposed to arrive a week ago." "Sheriff Daniels took a letter to town when he came by to take my statement about the stage robbery," Hank said. "Explained what happened, that you were recovering here. Got a reply yesterday. The school board says the position is still yours when you're well enough to take it." Relief washed over Sophia. "Thank you. I had nothing else to go to." The following week, Sophia attempted to stand on her own for the first time. Hank hovered nearby, ready to catch her if she fell, but determined to let her try. "Easy now," he cautioned as she swung her legs over the edge of the bed. "Don't rush it." Sophia took a deep breath, then pushed herself up. Her injured leg trembled violently, pain shooting up from her wound, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself to remain upright. For 3 glorious seconds she stood independently, then her leg gave way. Hank caught her before she could fall, his strong arms wrapping around her waist. "I've got you," he murmured, and Sophia found herself pressed against his chest, her face inches from his. For a moment they stood frozen, something electric passing between them. Then Hank gently helped her back to the bed. "That was good," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Real good for a first try." Each day after that, Sophia practiced standing, then taking a few steps, leaning heavily on Hank's arm. It was slow, frustrating work, but she was determined. 2 weeks after the stagecoach attack, she managed to walk unassisted from the bed to the table, a distance of perhaps 10 feet. It left her exhausted and in pain, but triumphant. "Look at you," Hank said, his face alight with pride. "Told you you'd be walking again before you knew it." That night, as they sat together for supper, Sophia realized with a pang that soon she would be well enough to leave for Willow Creek. The thought filled her with an unexpected sadness. Despite the circumstances, these weeks in Hank's cabin had been peaceful in a way her life hadn't been for years. She'd come to appreciate his quiet strength, his gentle hands, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "Penny for your thoughts," Hank said, breaking into her reverie. Sophia looked up, meeting his gaze. "I was just thinking that I'll miss this place when I go." Something flickered in Hank's eyes, something that made her heart beat faster. "You could stay longer," he said carefully, "till you're fully healed." "I wouldn't want to impose." You're not imposing," he interrupted. "Not at all." The way he said it made Sophia wonder if perhaps he might miss her too when she was gone. As summer turned to fall, Sophia's strength returned. She could now walk around the cabin and even ventured outside to sit on the porch, watching as Hank worked with his cattle or repaired fences. He'd fashioned her a cane from a sturdy branch, polishing it smooth so it wouldn't hurt her hands. One crisp October morning, Sophia decided to surprise Hank by preparing breakfast before he returned from his early chores. She was stirring a pot of oatmeal when the cabin door opened. "Something smells good," Hank said, stomping his boots to remove the mud before entering. He hung his hat on a peg by the door, running a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with sweat. "Thought I'd make myself useful for once," Sophia replied with a smile. "It's just oatmeal and coffee, I'm afraid." "Sounds perfect to me." Hank washed his hands in the basin by the door, then joined her at the table. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "Sheriff's coming by later today. Says there's news about the men who attacked your stage." Sophia's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "They caught them?" Hank nodded. 3 of the 6, at least. They tried to rob the bank in Helena, but things went south. 2 were killed in the shootout, and the 3rd was wounded and captured. He's talking, naming names. They'll want your statement to confirm it was the same gang." "Of course," Sophia said, though the thought of reliving that day made her stomach clench. Hank reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You don't have to do it if you're not ready. I can tell the sheriff to wait." The warmth of his hand on hers was comforting. "No, I want to. I want them brought to justice for what they did to those people. To me." Sheriff Daniels arrived shortly after noon, a tall, thin man with a silver mustache and sharp eyes. He was respectful as he questioned Sophia, asking her to describe the men who had attacked the stage, their weapons, anything she could remember. One of them had a scar, she recalled, running from his eye down to his jaw on the left side. He seemed to be the leader the others looked to him before they started shooting. The sheriff nodded, making notes. "That'd be Jeb Taylor. He's the one we've got in custody. The others were his brothers, Tom and Will." He looked up at her. "You've been mighty helpful, Miss Allen. With your testimony, we can make sure Taylor hangs for what he did." After the sheriff left, Sophia found herself trembling, the memories she'd pushed away for weeks now rushing back. Hank guided her to the rocking chair by the fire, draping a blanket over her shoulders. "You did well," he said, kneeling beside her. "Real well." "Will I have to go to the trial?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "Not sure," Hank admitted. "But if you do, you won't be alone. I'll be right there with you." He hesitated, then added, "For as long as you need me." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Sophia realized something had shifted between them. What had begun as simple gratitude on her part and duty on his had grown into something deeper, more complex. "Thank you," she whispered, not trusting herself to say more. The next morning, Sophia woke to the sound of hammering. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, one of the few items Hank had salvaged from her trunk after the attack, she made her way outside. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of the winter to come. Hank was on the far side of the cabin, tools spread around him, working on what appeared to be a small addition to the structure. He looked up as she approached, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "You're up early," he said, setting down his hammer. "What are you building?" Sophia asked, leaning on her cane. Hank looked almost embarrassed. "Well, I thought... That is, it occurred to me that you might want some privacy, a room of your own, instead of being out in the open in the main cabin." Sophia stared at the half-finished framework, something warm unfurling in her chest. "You're building me a room." "If you want to stay a while longer," Hank said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Winter's coming. Roads get bad. Might be safer for you here than trying to make it to town before spring." It was a practical explanation, but Sophia sensed there was more to it than that. "I wouldn't want to be a burden." Now Hank did look at her, his blue eyes serious. "You've never been a burden, Sophia. Not once." It was the first time he'd used her given name rather than calling her Miss Allen. The sound of it in his deep voice made her breath catch. "Then yes," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'd like to stay." Over the next few weeks, Hank worked on the addition whenever he could spare time from his ranch duties. Sophia helped as much as she was able, holding boards steady or passing nails. Her strength continued to improve, and she found she could walk longer distances without the cane, though her legs still ached in cold or damp weather. They settled into a routine that felt remarkably domestic. Sophia took over much of the cooking and mending, while Hank handled the heavier chores. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading. Hank had a small collection of books he'd acquired over the years, or simply talking. Sophia learned that beneath his quiet exterior, Hank was both thoughtful and surprisingly well-read. He'd been educated in a one-room schoolhouse in Ohio until he was 16 when the war broke out, and he'd lied about his age to enlist. "Always regretted not finishing my schooling," he admitted one night. "Promised myself I'd keep learning anyway." "You're more educated than many men I knew in Philadelphia who claimed to be scholars," Sophia told him. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the landscape into a pristine white wilderness. By then, the addition to the cabin was finished, a small but comfortable room with a window looking out toward the mountains. Hank had built her a bed, a small dresser, and even a bookshelf, which stood mostly empty except for a few volumes he'd insisted she consider her own. The day she moved into her new room, Sophia found a bouquet of dried wildflowers on the dresser, tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Gathered them before the frost," Hank explained when she thanked him. "Thought they might brighten things up." It was such a thoughtful gesture that Sophia had to blink back tears. Without thinking, she stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. Hank froze, his eyes widening in surprise. "I'm sorry," Sophia said quickly, stepping back. "I shouldn't have—" "No," Hank interrupted, his voice rough. "No need to apologize." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Blue barked outside, alerting them to a rider approaching. Hank excused himself to see who it was, and Sophia retreated to her new room, her heart pounding with emotions she wasn't ready to examine too closely. The visitor turned out to be a neighbor, bringing word that one of Hank's steers had wandered onto his property. Hank would need to ride out to retrieve it, which meant leaving Sophia alone for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch. "I'll be fine," she assured him when he hesitated. "Really, Blue will keep me company, and I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself for a day." "I don't like leaving you," Hank admitted. "What if your leg starts bothering you, or—" "Hank," Sophia interrupted gently. "I've been here for months. I'm not an invalid anymore. Go get your steer before this weather gets worse." Finally, reluctantly, he agreed. "I'll be back by nightfall if I can. If not, don't worry, I'll camp with George if the snow picks up." After he left, Sophia kept herself busy with chores, enjoying the rare solitude. She'd grown accustomed to Hank's presence, but it was refreshing to move about the cabin without being watched, without feeling his concern following her every step. She baked bread, swept the floors, and even attempted to mend one of Hank's shirts that had a torn sleeve. As dusk approached, the snow began to fall more heavily. Sophia built up the fire and lit lamps, keeping one in the window as a beacon for Hank's return. When full darkness descended with no sign of him, she tried not to worry. He was experienced in this terrain, and he'd warned her he might not make it back. Still, she found herself sitting by the window, watching the snow swirl in the lamplight until her eyes grew heavy. Eventually, she retreated to her bed, Blue curling up on the rug beside her. She woke sometime in the night to the sound of the cabin door opening. Relief flooded her as she heard Hank's familiar tread, the thud of his boots being removed, the rustle as he hung up his coat. She almost called out to him, but something held her back. Instead, she lay listening as he moved quietly around the main room, banking the fire for the night, careful not to make too much noise. In the morning, she found him already up, coffee brewing on the stove. He looked tired, but pleased to see her. "You made it back," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Roads weren't as bad as I feared," Hank replied. "Found my steer easy enough. Stubborn creature was helping himself to George's hay." Something had changed between them during their brief separation. There was a new awareness, a tension that hadn't been there before. Sophia caught Hank watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his eyes quickly darting away when she turned toward him. For her part, she found herself increasingly conscious of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his hands, the way the corner of his mouth quirked up when he was amused, but trying not to show it. As winter deepened, they were increasingly confined to the cabin by snow and bitter cold. Hank still had to tend to his cattle, breaking ice on the water troughs and distributing hay, but these chores were accomplished as quickly as possible before retreating back to the warmth of the cabin. The forced proximity might have been uncomfortable, but instead, Sophia found it oddly comforting. They developed ways of moving around each other in the small space, a dance of sorts that became familiar and reassuring. They took turns reading aloud in the evenings. Hank had a particular fondness for Shakespeare, surprising Sophia with his ability to bring the old words to life. One night, as a blizzard howled outside, Hank asked about her plans for the spring. "The school board in Willow Creek wrote again," he said, feeding another log to the fire. Asked if you'd still be taking the teaching position when the weather clears. Sophia looked up from the socks she was darning. What did you tell them? That I'd ask you, Hank replied, not meeting her eyes. It's your decision to make, not mine. The question hung in the air between them. Sophia had thought often about what she would do when spring came, when she was fully healed and able to travel safely. The teaching position had been her goal, her reason for coming west, but that was before the stagecoach attack, before Hank. I don't know, she admitted finally. I came west to be a teacher. It's what I was trained to do. Hank nodded, his expression carefully neutral. You'd be good at it. The children would be lucky to have you. But, Sophia prompted, sensing there was more he wanted to say. Hank hesitated, then shook his head. No buts. Like I said, it's your decision. The conversation ended there, but it lingered in Sophia's mind for days afterward. What did she want? The teaching position offered security, respectability, independence. But the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Hank, created an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her healing wounds. Christmas approached, bringing with it a brief respite from the harshest weather. Hank rode into town for supplies and returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper and string, which he placed beneath the modest pine tree they'd cut and decorated with strings of dried berries and popcorn. What's this? Sophia asked, eyeing the package with curiosity. Christmas isn't for 2 more days, Hank replied with a smile. You'll have to wait and see. Sophia hadn't expected gifts. She'd managed to knit Hank a new scarf in secret, using yarn from an old sweater he no longer wore, but she hadn't thought he would reciprocate. The realization that he'd thought of her while in town, that he'd gone out of his way to find her a present, filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. On Christmas morning, they exchanged their modest gifts. Hank seemed genuinely touched by the scarf, immediately wrapping it around his neck despite the warmth of the cabin. Your turn, he said, pushing the small package toward her. Sophia unwrapped it carefully to find a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she discovered it was a journal, its pages blank and waiting to be filled. I noticed you writing sometimes on scraps of paper, Hank explained. Thought you might like something proper to write in. Sophia ran her fingers over the soft leather cover, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. It's perfect, she said softly. Thank you. There's something else, Hank said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small carved wooden figure, a horse, meticulously detailed despite its small size. Made this too. It's rusty. Thought he deserved some credit, since he helped get you here that first day. Sophia took the carving, examining the careful workmanship. You made this? It's beautiful. Been whittling since I was a boy, Hank said with a shrug, though he looked pleased by her reaction. Passes the time on long cattle drives. Impulsively, Sophia leaned forward and embraced him. After a moment of surprise, Hank's arms came around her, holding her gently. It was the closest they had been since those early days when he had carried her, and Sophia was acutely aware of his strength, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. When they pulled apart, Hank's eyes were dark with an emotion Sophia couldn't quite name. For a breathless moment she thought he might kiss her, but then Blue barked outside, breaking the spell. Hank cleared his throat and stood, mumbling something about checking on the livestock. Left alone, Sophia clutched the wooden horse to her chest, her heart racing. Something had shifted again, something significant. The question was what she intended to do about it. The new year arrived with a thaw, brief but welcome after weeks of bitter cold. Sophia ventured outside more frequently, no longer needing her cane except on the most uneven terrain. Her leg would likely always bear the scars of the attack, both visible and invisible. She still woke sometimes from nightmares of gunfire and blood, but she was healing, growing stronger every day. One crisp, clear morning, Hank suggested they ride out to check fence lines on the far side of his property. Think you're up to it? He asked over breakfast. It's a fair distance, but Penny's gentle, and we can take it slow. Sophia hadn't been on a horse since before the attack. The thought was intimidating, but also appealing, a chance to see more of the ranch, to test her strength in a new way. "I'd like that," she decided, "if you think I can manage it." Hank helped her saddle Penny, the dappled gray mare who indeed seemed to have a gentle disposition. He showed Sophia how to mount without putting too much strain on her injured leg, then checked to make sure she was securely seated before mounting Rusty himself. They rode out under a sky so blue it hurt to look at it, the snow-covered landscape glittering in the sunlight. Hank led them at an easy pace, pointing out landmarks as they went a ridge where he'd once tracked a mountain lion, a stand of aspens where moose liked to gather in spring, a creek that ran full and fast during the snowmelt, but was now frozen solid. Sophia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, enjoying the quiet companionship and the breathtaking scenery. Her leg ached somewhat from the unaccustomed position, but not unbearably so. They stopped to rest at the top of a rise that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. Dismounting, Hank helped Sophia down from Penny, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. He spread a blanket on a relatively dry patch of ground beneath a pine tree, and they sat together, sharing jerky and dried apples from his saddlebags. "It's beautiful here," Sophia said, gazing out at the mountains that ringed the valley, so different from Philadelphia. "Do you miss it?" Hank asked. "The city, I mean?" Sophia considered the question. "I miss certain things, libraries, music, the bustle of people. But mostly, I miss what it was before my parents died, the sense of security, of knowing where I belonged." She looked at him. "But no, I don't want to go back, even if I could." Hank nodded, seeming to understand what she wasn't quite saying. "When I first came here, I wasn't sure I'd stay," he admitted. "Thought maybe I'd work a few seasons, save up, move on. But something about this place, it gets under your skin." "It does," Sophia agreed softly. They were quiet for a moment, the only sounds the whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional stamp of the horse's hooves. "Sophia," Hank began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about spring coming, about you leaving for Willow Creek." Sophia's heart quickened. "Have you?" "Yes." He picked up a pine needle, twirling it between his fingers. "And I've realized something. I don't want you to go." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Sophia found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to continue. "I know you came west to teach," Hank went on, still not looking at her. "And I wouldn't ask you to give up that dream. But I thought that is. I wondered if you might consider staying. Here. With me." Now he did look at her, his blue eyes vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "These past months, having you here, it's made this place feel like a home in a way it never did before. And the thought of going back to how it was, to being alone again," he shook his head. "I don't want that. I want you, Sophia. If you'll have me." Sophia's throat tightened with emotion. For months she'd been fighting her growing feelings for this quiet, strong man who had saved her life, and then, day by day, had stolen her heart. She'd told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural result of their unusual circumstances. But sitting here now, hearing him lay his heart bare, she knew it was far more than that. "What about my teaching?" she asked, needing to be sure he'd thought this through. "Willow Creek's only half a day's ride," Hank said. "You could still teach if that's what you want. Ride in with me when I go to town for supplies, stay during the week, come home on weekends." He paused. "Or there are children on nearby ranches who need schooling too. You could teach here if you preferred." He'd thought about this, planned for it. The realization made Sophia's heart swell. "And what exactly are you asking me, Hank Morgan?" she said, needing to hear him say it plainly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm asking you to marry me, Sophia Allen, to be my wife, my partner, to build a life here, together." Sophia didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, reaching for his hand. "Yes, I'll marry you." The joy that transformed Hank's face was something Sophia knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. When he finally kissed her, it was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that left them both breathless. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "Have for a while now, I think." "And I love you," Sophia replied, marveling at how natural the words felt. How right, even when I was trying not to. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, riding side by side, their hands occasionally reaching across the space between their horses to touch, to reassure themselves that this new joy was real. Blue greeted them at the cabin, barking excitedly as if he sensed the change in their relationship. That night, they sat together before the fire, making plans for their future. They would marry as soon as the snow cleared enough for the circuit preacher to make his way to the ranch. Sophia would write to the school board in Willow Creek, explaining her change in circumstances and inquiring about the possibility of teaching part-time. Hank would begin building additional rooms onto the cabin, a proper bedroom for them, and perhaps, someday, rooms for children. "Do you want children?" Sophia asked, suddenly realizing they'd never discussed it. Hank's expression softened. "Very much, if you do." "I do," Sophia said, imagining little boys with Hank's blue eyes, or girls with his quiet strength. "I'd like that very much." Winter gradually gave way to spring, the snow retreating up the mountainsides, wildflowers beginning to dot the meadows. True to his word, Hank began expanding the cabin, enlisting the help of neighboring ranchers who were both curious about and approving of the schoolteacher who had captured the solitary rancher's heart. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the scattered community. Women from nearby ranches rode out to meet Sophia, bringing wedding gifts and barely concealed curiosity. Most were welcoming, glad to have another woman nearby, though a few seemed skeptical of the city girl who had wound up in their midst under such unusual circumstances. One afternoon in early April, Sophia was hanging laundry to dry in the spring sunshine when she heard riders approaching. Shading her eyes, she recognized Sheriff Daniels, accompanied by a man she didn't know. "Afternoon, Miss Allen," the sheriff called, dismounting. "Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Sophia replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hank's out checking the herd, but he should be back soon. Can I offer you coffee?" "That would be mighty kind," Sheriff Daniels said. "This here is Judge Parker, come from Helena for the Taylor trial." The older man tipped his hat to Sophia. "Madam, sorry to disturb your day, but I wanted to speak with you directly about testifying." Sophia's stomach knotted. She'd known this was coming, but the reality of it still sent a chill through her. "Of course, please come inside." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Judge Parker explained that Jeb Taylor's trial would begin in 2 weeks. As the only surviving witness to the stagecoach robbery, Sophia's testimony would be crucial to securing a conviction. "We've got him dead to rights on the bank robbery attempt," the judge said, "but adding the stagecoach murders would ensure he hangs. Can't bring back those folks he killed, but we can see justice done." "I understand," Sophia said, her hands tight around her coffee cup. "I'll testify." "It won't be easy," Sheriff Daniels warned. "Taylor's got a mean streak a mile wide, and he'll be staring right at you in that courtroom. Plus, his lawyer will try to rattle you, make you seem confused or uncertain." "I won't be rattled," Sophia said with more confidence than she felt. "I remember everything about that day. Everything." When Hank returned and learned of the visit, his first concern was for Sophia. "You don't have to do this," he insisted, once the sheriff and judge had departed. "They've got him on the bank robbery. That's enough." "It's not enough," Sophia said firmly. "Those people on the stagecoach, they deserve justice, too. I'm the only one left who can speak for them." Hank's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then we'll go together. I'll be right there with you." The trial was held in the Helena Courthouse, a grand building that reminded Sophia somewhat of those in Philadelphia. She and Hank arrived the day before, staying at a hotel near the courthouse. Despite the seriousness of their purpose, Sophia couldn't help but enjoy the novelty of being in a proper town again, the shops, the restaurants, the bustle of people. That night, alone in their hotel room, Hank held her close. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "I'm proud of you. It takes courage to face a man like Taylor." "I'm scared," Sophia admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. "I know," Hank said, stroking her hair, "but you're stronger than you think. Always have been." The next morning, Sophia dressed with care in her best dress, one of several that the women of the surrounding ranches had altered and gifted to her after hearing of her circumstances. Her hands trembled as she pinned up her hair, but her resolve remained firm. The courtroom was packed when they arrived, curious townspeople and reporters crowding the benches. Hank kept his arm around Sophia's waist as they made their way to seats reserved for them near the front. When Jeb Taylor was brought in, shackled and flanked by deputies, Sophia's breath caught. The scar on his face was exactly as she remembered, a jagged line from eye to jaw. His eyes, cold and hard, swept the courtroom, pausing when they landed on her. A slow, malevolent smile spread across his face, and Sophia felt Hank tense beside her. The trial proceeded with the formality of legal proceedings, the judge's instructions, the prosecutor's opening statements, the defense attorney's rebuttal. Sophia listened with growing apprehension as witnesses were called and questioned, each one bringing the moment of her own testimony closer. Finally, her name was called. Hank squeezed her hand once before she rose, making her way to the witness stand with as much dignity as she could muster. After being sworn in, she faced the prosecutor, a serious young man named Collins. "Miss Allen," he began, "could you please tell the court in your own words what happened on the afternoon of July 18th last year?" Sophia took a deep breath and began her account, describing the stagecoach journey, the sudden appearance of the bandits, the terror as the shooting began. As she spoke, her voice grew stronger, more certain. She described crawling behind the boulder, the pain of her wounds, the bandits' voices as they looted the bodies in the coach. "And are you certain the defendant Jeb Taylor was among those men?" Collins asked. "Yes," Sophia said without hesitation. "He was the one giving orders. I saw his face clearly when he checked inside the coach. That scar is unmistakable." Throughout her testimony, she was aware of Taylor's eyes on her, his expression a mix of hatred and amusement. She refused to look directly at him, focusing instead on the prosecutor, on the judge, occasionally on Hank's supportive presence in the gallery. The defense attorney, a sharp-featured man named Willoughby, approached for cross-examination with a predatory smile. "Miss Allen, you've given us quite a vivid account of a traumatic experience, but I must ask, how reliable is your memory given the circumstances? You were injured, frightened, presumably in shock." "My memory is very clear," Sophia replied firmly. "Some details may have blurred, but not the faces of the men who killed innocent people in cold blood." "And yet you only saw the attackers briefly, from a distance, while hiding and injured," Willoughby pressed. "Isn't it possible you've confused my client with someone else? After all, scars are not uncommon among men in these territories." "No," Sophia said. "It was him." The questioning continued, Willoughby attempting to undermine her certainty, to suggest she was mistaken or confused or even lying to protect herself. But Sophia remained steadfast, refusing to be shaken. When she was finally permitted to step down, her legs were trembling so badly she feared she might fall. But she walked with her head high back to her seat, where Hank immediately took her hand in his. "You did it," he whispered. "You were magnificent." The trial continued for 2 more days, with other witnesses testifying about the bank robbery attempt and Taylor's known associates. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, they returned after less than an hour with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Parker sentenced Taylor to hang in 1 week's time. As the condemned man was led from the courtroom, he turned to glare at Sophia one final time. "Should have checked behind that rock," he spat. "Wouldn't be here if I had." Hank stepped between them, shielding Sophia from Taylor's venom. "But you didn't," he said quietly, "and now you'll pay for it." Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Daniels approached them. "You did a brave thing in there, Miss Allen," he said. "Thanks to you, those families will have some closure." "Will we need to stay for the execution?" Sophia asked, the thought filling her with dread. The sheriff shook his head. "No need. Your part's done. You can head home with a clear conscience." Home. The word resonated with Sophia as she and Hank rode back to the ranch the following day. 6 months ago, she'd been traveling to a town she'd never seen, to take a job she'd secured through correspondence, alone in the world. Now, she was returning to a place that had become her home, with a man who had become her heart. The preacher arrived in late April, when the meadows were carpeted with wildflowers and the aspens were just beginning to leaf out. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held outside the cabin with the mountains as a backdrop. Neighbors from surrounding ranches attended, bringing food and music and good wishes. Sophia wore a dress of pale blue calico with wildflowers in her hair. Hank, usually seen in work clothes, had donned his one good suit, looking both handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal attire. "I, Sophia Allen, take thee, Henry Morgan, to be my wedded husband," Sophia said, her voice clear and sure as she repeated the preacher's words. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Hank's hands were warm around hers as he spoke his own vows, his deep voice carrying across the gathering. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Later, as neighbors danced to fiddle music in the yard, Hank led Sophia a little way from the celebration to a quiet spot where they could see the sunset painting the mountains gold and pink. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Sophia replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And you?" "I have everything I never knew I wanted," Hank said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A wife, a home, a future that looks brighter than I could have imagined." As twilight deepened into night, they returned to the celebration, joining in the dancing despite Sophia's slight limp. When it came time for the traditional first dance as husband and wife, Hank surprised everyone by lifting Sophia into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed, her arms going around his neck. Hank's eyes twinkled with mischief and love. "Be in your legs," he said, swinging her in a circle as the music played, "just like I promised." 5 years later, Sophia sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Hank taught their 4-year-old son Thomas to ride his first pony. Their daughter, Elizabeth, just 2, sat on Sophia's lap, clapping her hands in delight at her brother's antics. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Hank had expanded his herd, while Sophia had indeed become a teacher, not in Willow Creek, but right here, in a small schoolhouse Hank and the neighboring ranchers had built halfway between the scattered homesteads. 3 days a week, children from miles around gathered to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and history from Mrs. Morgan, whose gentle but firm teaching style had earned her the respect of even the most reluctant students. Life wasn't always easy. The Montana Territory could be harsh and unforgiving. There had been blizzards that threatened their livestock, drought summers that withered crops, illnesses that had frightened them with their intensity. But through it all, they had faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. "Mama, look," Thomas called, sitting proudly atop his pony as Hank led them around the corral. "I'm riding by myself." "I see you, darling," Sophia called back, waving. "You're doing wonderfully." Elizabeth squirmed in her lap, reaching toward her father and brother. "Me too, me ride." "When you're a bit bigger," Sophia promised, kissing her daughter's dark curls. "For now, you'll have to be patient." As the sun began to set, Hank lifted Thomas down from the pony, then led the animal back to the barn. The boy raced toward the porch, full of excitement about his adventure. "Papa says I'm a natural," he announced, climbing onto the porch. "Just like him." "Of course you are," Sophia agreed, ruffling his hair the same shade of brown as Hank's, though he had her green eyes. Hank joined them a few minutes later, settling beside Sophia on the bench. Elizabeth immediately climbed into his lap, her favorite perch. "He did well," Hank said, nodding toward their son, who was now engaged in an elaborate game with Blue's latest litter of puppies. "Got a good seat, listens well." "Takes after his father," Sophia said with a smile. Hank shook his head. "Has his mother's brains, thank goodness, and her courage." They sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. After the children were put to bed, they would have their own quiet time together, perhaps reading or simply talking about their day. It was a simple life, but a rich one, filled with love and purpose. Sometimes Sophia still dreamed of the stagecoach attack, waking with a start in the darkness. But Hank was always there, his arm around her, his voice low and reassuring as he reminded her that she was safe, that they were together, that nothing could harm her while he was near. And on the rare occasions when her old wounds pained her, when her leg refused to cooperate fully with her wishes, Hank would scoop her into his arms just as he had that first day, carrying her wherever she needed to go. "Still being my legs?" she would tease, and Hank would smile, the smile that even after all these years could make her heart skip a beat and say, "Always, Sophia, for as long as you need me," to which she would always reply, her arms tight around his neck, "That would be forever, then." And it was.